Welcome to another episode of CPAC Now, America Uncanceled. I'm Matt Schlapp, of course, along with
Are you getting tired of me, Schlapp?
No, I love
you.
you.
Oh, thank God.
We're doing okay.
I'm so glad.
As people ask me all the time about my health, everything's good.
Everything's good.
But we have one of our very favorite friends and brilliant people with us on the show today.
Can I introduce him?
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds great. We have Kevin Hassett. He is vice president at the Lindsay Group and distinguished fellow at the Hoover Institute and a former White House colleague of mine. Actually, we would sit in the Roosevelt room, usually right next to each other. So I would get the best economic news from Kevin Hassett. Kevin, thank you for joining us.
It's great to be here, Mercy. I think we went through, 4 chiefs of staff while we were there?
Boy, I lost track by the end of it. But you know what? You really did such an amazing job. I know you were there at the beginning, and then you were called to go back to the administration when this pandemic started. I'm sure it was an interesting time now that you're seeing this really Delta variant take hold of this country. What are your thoughts in terms of what we're seeing with the Biden administration's response so far in dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, I think that one of the things is that go back that, again, the president asked me to come in as senior advisor right when the COVID crisis was obvious it was going to be a crisis. I think I was literally in the outback of Australia when I got the phone call to fly back. And I think if the president hadn't called me back, that I'd probably still be in Australia, right, given that they had shut down all the travel. But I think that the first thing that, because, we obviously have strong political views, but we also care a lot about our country. And the first thing that we need to do is understand that this is a really fog of war kind of virus, that it's evolving in ways that people are learning about in real time. And especially at the beginning, there was just so much stuff that wasn't known and judgments the president had to make on the fly, based on, what turned out to be like really bad information. And so one of the things that's going on now with the Biden administration is they have absolutely no clue what's going on with the Delta variant, really. And they're, in my mind, kind of discussing it incorrectly. We could talk about that, and responding way too slowly to it as well. But on the other hand, I understand that it's an evolving thing where there's a lot of information that's hard to gather. People are just learning how bad it is right now. And, the Biden administration is behind the curve. If the Trump administration were as behind the curve as the Biden administration is now, can you imagine what would be happening in the media? Right. But like nobody's talking about it at all. But let's just talk about what the facts on the ground are. The facts on the ground are, and I know I get to nerd out on your show. That's why I come. That because it's an RNA virus, not a DNA virus, then what it means is it's got like half a strand of DNA, and then they sort of mush together, and it does it with error. And so this virus, it mutates all the time. It's not like a kind of virus that's just going to reproduce and then be the same. It mutates all the time. And I looked at the data. They do genomics, so they track like how many versions of each type of virus there is. And the Delta variant alone, as of yesterday, had 622 different mutations. 622 wow. Of the Delta variant. And so what's happening is that this virus mutates all the time, and then it gets a little bit better at avoiding our immune system over time with those mutations. And the things that are best at causing us trouble health-wise are the things that then reproduce the most. And so just a last little mental thing. Remember the space shuttle on Star Trek? They would get on it and they'd go down and they'd like land on the moon, and they needed dilithium crystals or so. Every show they needed to find some dilithium crystals. Well, think of the virus as being the little space shuttle, and it goes and it lands on the moon, and then it drills down to get the dilithium crystals, and the virus is drilling down so it can reproduce in your cell. And so the spike protein you hear about, it's like the drill. And the virus is like the space shuttle. And so what our immune system does is it takes the space shuttle and it carries it off the moon before it can get the dilithium crystals. And what's happening with the Delta variant is it's got like really good shields. So when the virus, when our antibodies come down to grab it and pull it off the cell, then they can't. And it's got a really powerful drill, so it drills really fast. And gets to the cell really fast. And so between the two, it spreads insanely fast and even hits people with vaccines. And so as of the last few days, more than 80% of cases in the U.S., new cases, were the Delta variant. And there are more people with vaccines getting it than not. But the vaccine protects you from going to the hospital. But it's a really bad situation. And the thing, though, that I think that nobody's talking about that upsets me a lot is that because there's 622 variants, there's going to be 800 variants, 3 weeks from now.
Wow.
And so this thing is mutating really quickly. And my guess is that before long, there's going to be a version of it that makes it so that even vaccinated people can end up in the hospital, with probability.
I don't know about you, but I'm thinking Kevin Hassett should take Anthony Fauci's job.
No, seriously.
Seriously, that's
wish,
like the best explanation I've heard.
But there's no politics. There shouldn't be any politics around the virus. Why they haven't called you and the other experts to actually, even off the record, because you're the kind of person, I know you would do it.
Yeah.
Off the record, just to help them think about this. It's so obvious that they are viewing this as a mission accomplished moment where they want to look like they're being good managers, but they're not open to learning and listening.
Well, I have spoken to some of the folks there, but the thing I can say is just that there's maybe a 30% chance that we're in the eye of the storm, and a 70% chance that the vaccine will continue to protect people, and the Delta variant won't mutate to the point where it's really causing a lot of trouble. But it's a time to be extremely anxious. And so, I know people are talking about masks and shutdowns and all that kind of stuff, and we could talk about the effectiveness of those things. But, I think that all of us should be cautious again, because this is a bad thing. And so, exercising caution, for me, I think the most important thing is social distancing. Just, so if there's a crowded elevator, let it go by. But I think that it really is prudent for everybody to take a step back and remember that this is a wave. Like we had a few days ago, another 80,000 cases in one day, and this is something that peaked at 250,000 last January. 80,000 in a day. It's a stupendously high number, and it's a variant that's really moving fast. And so that means we could end up, basically looking about like we did last January if we're not careful.
And I want to shift to the economy, but I really want to just talk about this real quickly and ask you this question. When we were at the White House, one of the things we worked on were these communications rollouts where we would get different teams and for example, the public liaison office, the political office, the policy office, in rolling out how we would talk about this messaging. And I just really think that the Biden administration has botched this rollout time and time again. They just keep throwing out the guidance, causing huge confusion. And quite frankly, I think the American people have grown more and more frustrated with how the messaging continues to change day to day without a valid explanation. Your thoughts?
And honestly, again, I'm not being Mr. Political here, at least not trying to be, that, President Trump believes that everybody should get a vaccine, if unless their religion tells them they shouldn't, or that they have a special medical reason why they should talk to their doctor. Right. But he's a big advocate of the vaccine. He was one of the first to get the vaccine. He told everybody around him to get a vaccine. He loves the vaccine. The vaccine came way faster than it would have because of how much effort his team put into developing the vaccine. The fact that that a lot of Trump supporters aren't taking the vaccine. I think that's in part related to the fact that they're not letting President Trump go on TV and tell people to take the vaccine. It's making people wonder, give him his social media account back so that he can push the vaccine, because he would. He loves the vaccine. But everybody wonders, why is it that there's a political divide right now? It's because they're allowing there to be. If I were President Biden, I'd ask President Trump to do a public service ad telling everybody to get the vaccine. Wouldn't you?
Yeah, I think that would be a very smart idea.
Yeah, and he would, and he brought it up at CPAC, and he brought it up at his speech recently. I mean, when he gets the chance to talk about the vaccine, I always just try to turn it back on them and call it the Trump vaccines, because it's actually honestly true.
Which Kamala didn't want to take. Remember, she's like, I don't trust the Trump vaccine. So they're the ones that started this kind of anti-vax movement.
But the thing about the Delta variant, though, I really want to say is that it's a nasty thing. that there are going to be a lot more COVID cases. It's going to go up before it goes down. And
Right.
if you had a vaccine, you're probably not going to the hospital. It's not a 100% guarantee. I know just in my circle of friends, one person who's vaccinated who ended up in the hospital because of it. But the vaccine could really save your life. You know, I think everybody should run out and get the vaccine if they don't have it. And I think that's what President Trump would want too. But the story that it's just like the stupid, CPAC attending morons that are anti-vaxxers that are getting the Delta variant is just false.
Because you said more people are getting the Delta variant who are vaccinated than who aren't vaccinated. One of the reasons for that statistically is there's a lot of vaccinated people.
Yeah, that's right. Or to put it another way, this is one of the things when I was looking through the data that really struck me the most was that about 90% of people in the UK have COVID antibodies, which means they've either been vaccinated at least once or had COVID. And yet the UK has, until recently, been the place in Europe with the most COVID cases. Mm. And so that doesn't mean you shouldn't get the vaccine, but it does mean that this is a really nasty variant, and it's going to spread like crazy. It's going to mutate more, and it really could end up lifting mortality a lot if people don't get vaccinated. But the spread of it is not just through people who oppose vaccines for political purposes. Right. The spread is happening with the vaccinated and the unvaccinated, and I just think that the best way to make it nonpartisan would be to have, like, how many times in emergencies in the past have we seen like all the presidents get together and urge everybody to do something? It's time for them to draw on President Trump as a messenger, because I do think that it's sad that there are a lot of Trump supporters that just are so tired of being lied to about everything that they just don't trust folks who tell them to get a vaccine, but they trust the president. So to silence his voice right now is costing people's lives, I think.
That's a great point. But let's shift over to economic data. You really do study the data that's happening out there. There was a New York Times story by Neil Irwine, who basically said, will the Delta variant wreck the economic recovery? What are your thoughts of the impact that the Delta variant is going to have on the economy as we move into the fall and into the winter?
Right. Well, a lot of it's going to depend on whether it continues to be the case that the vaccine is, very powerful protection against having a severe COVID case. So most vaccinated people that test positive right now are not even really having symptoms, because the vaccine is doing a good job even when they get the Delta variant. And so if that continues, then I think what we're about seeing right now, which is a recovery that started, according to the National Bureau of Economic Research, last April, year ago April. And so we had the shortest recession in history because of the really rapid economic response that we organized from the White House. And so that recovery could continue as long as we don't end up having like a huge increase. So if fatalities increase at the rate that the Delta is spreading right now, then I would guess that even conservative governors would start to take steps to try to slow that down. And then you could once again see, a negative quarter. But make no mistake, the recovery is running out of gas because of inflation. And the inflation is really out of control. I know everybody who's watching us right now, they go to the pump. I just filled up. It was $4 a gallon right in the DC area here, and they go to the grocery store and look at the price of bananas and milk, and, everything's up 30, 40%. A lot of things that you look most carefully at that really affect your lives this year, on average, are up almost 10% in the first half of the year. And that's because Biden's policy has been to throw money at the problem, huge amounts of money, trillions of dollars, at the same time that he's attacking the suppliers. And so he's threatening them with a big corporate tax hike. He's shutting down pipelines. He's doing things to restrict supply while he's increasing demand. And, the high school economic students would tell you that if you have higher demand, then if you have higher supply, then prices don't necessarily go up because supply can meet the demand. But if you have big higher demand and then you cut back supply because you tell people, hey, we're going to have the biggest corporate tax hike in history, so you shouldn't build a new factory, then when the demand goes up because we give people cash, the prices go up. That's just what happens because you got demand way bigger than supply. And so it's like people, you show up at the market and there's people who want to buy 500 apples, but there's one farmer there with 100 apples. Well, the price of apples is going to go up a lot, right? And he can charge a lot more for his apples. And that's what the whole economy is doing right now. And the Fed really, really has a problem. And so is the recovery going to peter out because of COVID. It could. But the recovery is petering out already because inflation is taking off. And inflation is so visible in the data that even the Biden administration is saying, oh, yeah, we see inflation, but it's temporary, right?
Right.
It's temporary. I went back and looked, and there's never been ever in U.S. history, except, well, there was 1 year under Paul Volcker, but as long as we don't lift interest rates to 20%, which is what Paul Volcker kind of did just about, then there's never been a first half of the year with inflation above 3%, which we just had, where the second half of the year was below 3%. And so what that means is inflation this year is going to be 6%. At least, I think 7-8%. And you're not going to go from 7-8% to 2 next year. So this idea that it's transitory, if it is transitory, if you go from 7 to 2, it'll be a miracle. It'll be like when we beat the Russians in hockey. I mean, it's
as we close out this segment, Kevin, I love it when you geek out, by the way. And there's so many questions.
Especially when he brings up Star Trek. Then you know for sure.
There's so many questions I want to ask you, but let's get right down to the forgotten men and women who were the beneficiary of your blue-collar boom. They've gotten all these subsidy checks from the government to pay their bills. Their prospects are a lot worse out there in the economy. But just how are they doing? Are their wages going up, going down, stagnant? Is everything getting worse as inflation goes up? What's going on?
Yeah, so the way to think about it is that you want wage inflation to be greater than price inflation. Right. So if prices go up to 10%, and your wage goes up 5%, then you're 5% worse off because the stuff you got to buy costs more than the extra money you have coming in. And so it's pretty simple. You just need to check the two. And under President Obama, basically price inflation and wage inflation were about the same over his whole 8 years. And so people at the end were actually slightly a little bit worse off than they were at the beginning. Under President Trump, we had real wage growth that was as big as anything you see going back to the Second World War. On a sustained basis because of the supply side policies, tax cuts, deregulation, and so on. So wages were growing faster than prices. In the first half of this year, we're looking at price growth that's, again, maybe 7% is about smoothing through the ups and downs about what price growth is, and wage growth is about 3%. And so people have lost 4% of their buying power. And that's a huge negative shock. And so, the way to think about it is that your salary hasn't gone up that much this year. Most of us, basically your salary gets adjusted like every January. So most people, their salary right now, if they're still working, is what it was at the beginning of the year. But prices are 7% higher. And so you're basically way worse off because when you go to the gas station, it's $4 a gallon. And that really upsets people. And it's one reason why Mercy's too young, but Matt and I can tell you that when we were kids, even when I was a kid watching like Dan Rather on the evening news, inflation was like the number one news story, like almost every night.
Yeah.
And the reason is that inflation really makes ordinary folks' lives worse because their wages don't keep up with the higher prices. And looking at the data and looking also at the surveys now, people are beginning to feel that. And I think that the number one economic issue going forward over the next year and a half is going to be inflation. Inflation is going to get voters very, very upset. And frankly, Biden policies have created a lot worse inflation because what you have to do is you have to get more supply if you have more demand. And so if you're going to throw cash at people, then you have to have a supply side tax cut or something at the same time so that then prices don't go up a lot. But instead, they've supply, stimulated demand. Honest to goodness, it's the most foolish economic policy I think I've ever seen.
Well, Kevin,
inflation, last thing, Mercy, because I know you're an internationally minded person, that if you look at the list of countries that have higher inflation than the U.S. right now, it's almost none in the whole world, but it's like Argentina, Russia right now, Turkey. Yeah, Turkey has higher inflation than the U.S. right now. But when you're basically higher than everybody except, say, Turkey and Argentina and a few other countries, then you know that you've really adopted policies that are similar to those of Turkey and Argentina, and it doesn't end well. And that's where we are right now.
Well, let me tell you,
48% inflation. So they're doing worse.
No, let me tell you, Kevin, we really appreciate your nerdy but yet informative economic insight. No, seriously, you should be like every day on television having your own like economic class to help Americans understand what we're facing right now in terms of Biden's inflations and failed economic policies. This was very helpful. We're going to definitely have you back on the show because we didn't even touch upon China, trade deficit, and all these other issues that are so important to understand as well. So